Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Today we'll be making peppermint chocolate scones, which is a great dessert, or, well, I guess you could use it for breakfast, but really it's kind of more of a dessert because how sweet it is. And it's perfect for Christmas, for winter, for January, and for New Year's, especially since they make nice little cut-up sizes. And it's super, super, super easy. I know a lot of the desserts I've been doing lately are a little bit more complicated, a little bit more intimidating. But scones are a great go-to dessert slash breakfast slash pastry slash deliciousness because they're so easy and because you can really crank a lot of them out. Now the recipe we're going to make today is going to make about 12 scones. You can cut them up to make mini ones if you want, or you can double or triple the batch to make 24 or 36 scones. And it's very easy to do that as long as your mixer can handle it. And you could possibly do it by hand if you really wanted to. I mean, it's not very complicated. You'll see how to do it. And I'll explain how to do it by hand for a couple of the steps that seem a little unusual. So on the mixer, we have 11 1/4 ounces of all-purpose flour, 1 ounce of cocoa powder, 2 2/3 ounces of granulated sugar, 9 grams of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I sift that all together to make sure to break up the baking powder and the cocoa powder because that can get kind of chunky. And then I just let it go on the mixer on low speed so that way everything got nice and mixed together. So that way we're just nice and blended. And then in this bowl, I have 6 ounces of heavy cream, 1/4 teaspoon of peppermint extract. That's optional. If you want an extra minty flavor, definitely use it. 1 whole egg and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then we just whisk that all together. I just used a little fork because it's just a small batch. And in this bowl, I have 4 ounces of chocolate chips. And to customize this recipe, feel free to use any kind of chocolate or your favorite candy bar from the grocery store, especially those candy bars because they melt a little bit better than chocolate chips. So that way you get some ooey gooey pieces, especially if it's still warm. And then in this little ramekin, I've got about 2 ounces of heavy cream, but it's probably more than we're going to need because we're just going to use it to brush the scones. And then I'm going to crush up about 2 ounces of peppermint candy. And hopefully you guys can see it. You usually use this to decorate gingerbread houses or you have them in a bowl or something like that. Candy canes work really well too, especially if you have those candy canes left over in your Christmas tree and you're like, no one wants to eat them anymore. Crush them up and you can use them for this recipe. Now, of course, we're going to go through this recipe as in the video, but just make sure to know that the main point of this is that we're not putting the candy into the dough. We're going to put it on top of the scones after they come out of the oven, so that way they melt a little bit, but they're still kind of chunky. If you put them into the dough and bake them, they're going to melt out completely, and it's going to look like it's going to look kind of gross. I don't know how to describe it. But anyway, so why don't we go ahead and get started. So, first thing we want to do is, I forgot to mention, there's also 4 ounces of unsalted butter, and we cut it up into cubes, and we're keeping it cold as well. So I already cut it into cubes, and I put it in the fridge, and then I weighed out the rest of the ingredients. So the first thing we're going to do is, after we've mixed all our dry ingredients together on low speed, we're going to add our 4 ounces of cubed butter to the mixer. Okay, see, it's just cut into little cubes. I just used a bench scraper or a knife or whatever you want to use. Then we're going to go ahead and bring this up, and we're going to let it run on low speed to cut it in. Now, if you were to do this by hand, you could use like a pastry blender and just kind of cut it in, or a couple knives. If I'm doing cutting in butter by hand, I like to use a bench scraper or 2 bench scrapers because it's just really sharp and it works a lot faster. You don't want to really work that butter in and make your dough tough. That's why we're using it. That's why we're using it cold, and that's why we're quote unquote cutting it in. Now, if you're doing it on a mixer, it's a little bit easier to overmix it. Just keep an eye on it. What we're looking for is that it's sandy or coarse in texture, and that you've got pea-sized pieces of butter. You can kick up the mixer to a little bit faster if you want, especially if you're doing a large batch and it's taking a while. Just make sure to cover up the top of your mixer with plastic wrap or your plastic screen or whatever you got with your mixer. All right, so you can see it looks pretty coarse. The butter is still in pea-sized pieces and chunks. And so we're good to go to add our liquid ingredients now. So we're going to start this on low speed again. And we're just going to go ahead and slowly drizzle this in. Doesn't have to absorb or anything. Just go ahead and just add it all in. You just don't want to splash it everywhere. And then go ahead and add your chocolate chips. All right. And once your chocolate chips are distributed, you're done. Okay. So right now, I'm just kind of just kneading it by hand in the mixer, just to get all the extra crumbs off the bottom and to make sure the chocolate chips are all evenly distributed. You can do this on the table. You can turn it out into that floured surface and knead it a little bit, but it's not really that necessary, especially once you start getting all those dry pieces in. So if you really wanted to, you could do this. And it's good to do it a little bit to get it nice and smooth. That way it's a little bit easier to handle, not too sticky. And then you're just going to kind of just eyeball this and divide it into 3 pieces. If you were doing a really big batch, you would weigh out the big chunk and then divide it up evenly, so that way all your scones are about the same size. But this small of a batch, you don't really have to worry about that. And we're just going to press these out until they're about 1 inch thick, which makes them about a 4-inch disc. All right, then we're just going to divide this up into 4 scones. And so, again, you could go smaller if you wanted to, or you can go into different shapes. This is just a very typical scone. And we're going to put this on our sheet pan lined with parchment paper. It's going to make 12 pieces, so we can get all 12 pieces on here. I think I made these a little bit smaller than 1 inch, but it's okay. It's a forgiving dough. So we'll work with it. All right, and then we're just going to brush on a little bit of heavy cream. And then if you want, you can put, you can sprinkle some sugar on top, but because we're doing the candy, it's not really that necessary because we're going to add it. All right, so we're going to bake our scones at 400 degrees for about 15 minutes or until they're dry and they look done, kind of like biscuits or how scones are supposed to be. You can always pick them up and feel the bottom of them too. The bottom should be hard and slightly darker than the rest of the scone. It's harder to tell with a dark scone, like a chocolate scone, but you know how things get brown on the bottom? That's kind of the same concept. All right, so our scones came out of the oven. They could probably be in there for a few more minutes. I think I was in there for about 20 minutes. I think I gave it a little bit more time. Then I realized my oven wasn't at 400, so it kind of made sense. But anyway, so we're going to roll with it. So I've crushed up my candy into chunks. And I only ended up using about seven of the pieces. Okay, now you can leave it like this, and they'll melt into it. Or you can pop it into the oven for another 1 to 2 minutes, just until they're just slightly melted. And that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I was just in there for about another minute or two, and you can see they got a little bit melty, so you can see it gets a kind of a different look to it, so however you want to do it. And it's just like a finishing, like a dusting of, you know, a medium grain sugar or something like that on top of a muffin. It's just decoration, but it also adds a little bit of flavor, a little bit of pop. All right, so that's how you make the peppermint chocolate scones. They're best served while they're still warm, so, you know, either serve them right out of the oven or, you know, somewhat close to being out of the oven, or warm them up before you serve them. They also freeze really well. The candy, kind of so. The chocolate scones, definitely. And the dough freezes really well, too. These guys will keep at room temperature for about 5 days or so. The candy kind of makes them a little bit moister, so they're a little bit more susceptible to getting moldy faster, but it's usually not a big issue. Other than that, I hope you all have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and I hope you all have a very prosperous New Year. Thank you for watching, and remember, the Aubergine Chef demystifying dessert, one recipe at a time.